Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello, my guest is Kenneth Valpey, also known as Krishna Kshitra Swami. He is a fellow of the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics and is a research fellow of the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies. He's a visiting scholar in the Department of Cultural and Religious Studies at the Chinese University of Hong Kong and is an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Religion at the University of Florida in Gainesville. He was also awarded the honor of being outstanding faculty member at the University of Florida. He's a member of the advisory board for Hinduism and Ecology Society based at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies and is author of the book Cow Care in Hindu Animal Ethics. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Nancy. It's my pleasure to be with you today, speaking from Poland.
You are obviously very involved internationally with the whole concept of having better relationships with the environment and particularly with our non-human animals. What do you believe we can learn in terms of how to care for our fellow creatures on this planet?
That's a nice question. I appreciate that you said non-human animals. It's quite an issue. First, to ask ourselves, what are we? And we call ourselves human, but then since Darwin, we have some understanding that actually we're also animals.
A lot of people don't realize that we're one of the 5 great apes, along with gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and orangutans.
Yes, that's a perspective that's become very prominent. But to answer your question, what can we learn specifically from Indian traditions that could help us in pursuing better relations with animals, and I would say a better way of living on this planet? It's a very big topic, but I might focus on 3 particular, somewhat technical terms. They're Sanskrit terms. One of them will be familiar to many of the listeners, and that is the word yoga.
Very popular here in the United States, but It's actually more than an exercise routine for health.
Exactly. It's much more than that. The second term, which may be familiar to some, is the word dharma. And a third term, which is becoming more known, is the word bhakti. This final term is sometimes translated as devotion. It's understood in Indian traditions to be the yoga of the heart, if you like. This is something I elaborate on in this book, Cow Care in Hindu Animal Ethics, taking cows as sort of the lens, the focus for thinking about our relations with animals in general.
The Indic traditions, Hindu, Jain, Buddhism, are very concerned about our relationship to the animals to the point where most are vegetarians and do not believe in eating the animals. I know some Jains even will keep their faces covered so that insects and other little beings aren't swallowed.
Exactly, yes. Speaking of our common identity with different living beings, what is it that we have in common is that we are all non-temporal beings who are inhabiting different bodies. Our bodies, we understand, are animated by what in the ancient Sanskrit language would be called Atma, or the living self, the spirit self, which lives beyond this body. When this body will be finished, and it's going to be finished, if not today or tomorrow, one of these days, what happens? It moves on to another body.
Let's talk about the animals and humans that are here now, because we have to be concerned about how we relate to other creatures and our ecosystems, and we are also interconnected. I'm curious why cows have become the animal that's so important in the Hindu tradition, because when I've been in India, they roam around free in the streets. The cars have to go around them. They don't move away for the vehicles.
That's right. And that's one thing, a very striking thing everyone experiences in India. There's a sense that cows are in a kind of special category. Some people I met will even say they are not animals. They are semi-divine. The way I would put it in brief is there's a sense that cows, in particular, of all the different species, facilitate human beings to have what many would call a proper relationship with the earth. That there are many features of cows in terms of what they provide human beings, both tangible and intangible goods. What's difficult for Westerners in particular is to understand the intangible goods. There is a very strong sense that there are benefits to be had. In fact, one elderly sage, or sadhu as they're called in India, that I talked with, who keeps a sanctuary for cows, some 45,000 cows in his sanctuary. He said that cows provide human beings with three things. They provide us with health, they provide us with education, and they provide us with prosperity.
How do they do that?
Well, that's going to be a longer lecture. In essence, the point he was making is that cows have a quality of purity. Now, one example of this, the dung of cows, the excrement of cows in the villages, it's completely standard to take the dung and mix it with some water and make a nice paste out of it, and then smear it on the mud floors, on the mud walls. And what you find is that it has a very kind of antiseptic character to it.
But they also use it for fuel. What I also found out when I was in India was that even though the cows are considered sacred and not to be killed, they can be utilized, that people do milk them and use them in other ways.
Yes. Oh, yes. You don't find so many vegans in India because they understand if you take care of cows nicely, they will give milk more than enough. They will give for their calves, and they will also be pleased to give the humans whom they appreciate are protecting them. They are keeping the cows as family members, and they will typically keep them for life. I say typically, actually now in the modern time, there are issues about this, which I talk about in my book. So you asked how is it that they provide prosperity and education. It's understood with prosperity that just having cows and taking care of them as family members fosters a sense of balance and also moderation in all human endeavors. And when there's balance, when there's moderation, there's prosperity. When we are excessive, this is our tendency to do everything in excess and to accumulate more than needed, then prosperity becomes difficult for us. With education, it was explained to me, the idea is that there's a whole value system surrounding the culture of caring for cows, and that this is character building.
Your book, Cow Care in Hindu Animal Ethics, is intended for whom? Because somebody like me, I have no pet cow. I have a cat.
That's a good point. First point is that this has been written and published in what would be called an academic press, Halgrave Macmillan, which is a subsidiary of Springer Nature, in their Animal Ethics series. It sort of pointed to scholars. There's an increasing number of scholars who are becoming interested in what's called animal studies, which takes the subject of animal-human relationships from many, many different angles. But I wanted to also make it available for us common folk, and so I was able to make the book open access, which means it's available free of charge.
Are these ethical considerations regarding cows applicable to other domesticated animals?
Yes, certainly. In fact, this was Mahatma Gandhi's point. Gandhi made the idea of ahimsa famous, mainly in the political sphere, but also, and very much important for him, was care for animals, and in particular, he emphasized cows. But he said a very interesting thing, that it is through cows that human beings come to understand their proper relation with all living beings. He saw it as the cow sort of as the pivotal form of life for humans to care for.
You are active all over the world. You were a former adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Religion at the University of Florida here in the United States. You were formerly a visiting scholar in the Department of Cultural and Religious Studies at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and you are a fellow of the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics in the United Kingdom and research fellow of the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies. Since you are engaged with other people teaching about religious beliefs, animal ethics in different traditions, why has Hinduism taken on the cow as sacred and promoting vegetarianism, but yet you don't find that in Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and some other belief systems?
I haven't done a lot of study of the history of the so-called Abrahamic traditions. I've spent more time, I've been visiting India since several decades. Unlike in the West, where unfortunately, I must say, cows have disappeared into the massive feedlots, part of industrial agriculture, so-called. But in India, cows are just very much visible. And I think there's been a consistent sense throughout the tradition, and it goes all the way back to the most ancient text, the Rig Veda, which is at least 3,000 years old and most probably older, where cows are mentioned 700 times, and then up into modern times. There's a cohesion there of culture, which is specifically in this feature of daily life, that cows are part of our lives and they are to be cared for. Having said that, it's not really quite so ideal as the picture I'm painting now.
Do you believe that most religions have a concern and a care for the fellow creatures on this planet?
Yes, I would say any religion worth the name in its deeper understanding. I think we have to see that with every religious tradition, including Hinduism, there are the more surface understanding and then there's a deeper understanding. So in Christianity, for example, famously hear of St. Francis of Assisi, and his concern, his care for animals. And we can find such persons in all traditions of the world. What is religion? Religion, religio, has something to do with making a connection with our deeper selves, or we like to say our higher selves. With this common basis, the deeper dimensions of religion naturally point in the direction of proper sense of interacting, relating with our fellow creatures.
You have a Hindu name, Krishna Kshetra Swami, and you advocate some of these Hindu beliefs regarding animals. What can we Westerners here in the United States take away from these ancient traditions, as you say, that have been in their writings for over 3,000 years?
Yes, the more accessible textual source for this is the Bhagavad Gita. Many of the principles that sort of underscore how we can relate with animals are to be found in the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is a very good source for understanding this whole tradition that's now typically called Hinduism, although that word Hindu is not to be found anywhere in these texts. It's teaching us how to develop a higher vision by which we can appreciate our kinship with all of life. And naturally, when there's a sense of kinship with other beings, we naturally understand how to behave with them. We develop a natural sense of respect, and certainly it gives us pause to consider how we relate in terms of how we nourish ourselves, whether it's really necessary to eat animals or if we can sustain ourselves much better and much healthier with vegetarian diet.
You have lived and worked in countries that are very meat-oriented in their diet. What obstacles have you found in terms of convincing people to become vegetarian and to treat animals with more respect?
Obstacles, they're everywhere because we are creatures of habit. And I would say the biggest obstacle is not so much individuals who may indeed become convinced that something should be changed about their lifestyle, especially having to do with their diet, but they run up against the obstacle of their social circles. What I've found, especially I've found in the Far East, in Hong Kong, and also I've visited several times mainland China, is people depend on the social circle in which they live, their families and the extended circle of family. If one day they tell their family and friends, actually, I've decided to be, vegetarian. What? No, there's no way. That's not going to happen in our family. So that's something that I've found again and again. People are open to the really quite reasonable arguments to change, to make some significant changes in diet which respect animals, but then they run up against the family, and the family may not have access to the ideas, the reasoning, and they also have their friends and their families, and so on. So it goes. This is a challenge.
You grew up in the United States, you've lived in India, you've worked in the United Kingdom, you're currently in Poland where we're talking internationally. What takes you around the world?
Well, that's what swamis do. I'm an itinerant monk, so to say. It's part of the tradition to kind of keep on the move. The rolling stone gathers no moss, as the saying goes. One of the ideas of the practice of this particular lifestyle is to sort of loosen the bolts, the tendency to be attached to a particular place and particular circumstances and so on, with the recognition that indeed it's all temporary and it's all going to be taken from us sooner or later, whether we like it or not.
What is caring about animals have to do with the current concern over climate change?
Yes, very good question, because it's a very much neglected question, unfortunately. We're all talking about limiting use of fossil fuels, and that's as it should be, but very little is being said about industrial agriculture, in particular animal agriculture, industrial animal agriculture, and its effect on the climate, both directly and indirectly. Animal ethics is really getting to the root of how to think about our relation to animals, by which then we start to make changes in that sphere.
Issues are definitely interrelated. I want to thank you so very much for caring about animals and letting us know that regardless of what religion or belief system we have, we can still be very concerned about animals and treat them in a very respectful way. Thank you for being my guest.
It's my pleasure.
I have been speaking with Kenneth Valpey, who is author of Cow Care in Hindu Animal Ethics. I'm Nancy Pearlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Perlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.